Welcome to everyone. My name is Margaret Ryder. I'm the Vice Chair of the committee. And I'm calling the meeting to order and would ask the Bureau staff to call roll.
Margaret Ryder.
Present.
David Weiss. Present. Diana Amaya. Present. Tamika Butler. Joseph Holt. Present. Gabriela Jimenez.
Present.
Catherine Lee Carey.
Present.
Assemblymember Jose Medina. Senator Jerry Hill.
I'm going to butt in just a second. Yeah, you need to press your button when you want to speak so you get a bright green light as opposed to a dull green light.
Thanks. Okay, we have then 6 members present, so we have a quorum. Just remind the members that we can only continue to do business as long as we have a quorum, so we need to have 5 members present throughout the entire day. So I hope everyone can stay through the end of the meeting so that we don't lose our quorum. Thank you. To the extent that committee members are using electronic media of any sort, they are using it for their own purposes, not to communicate among the members here on the podium. And just a reminder, we are not allowed to discuss any items that are not on the agenda. When we have people speak to us, we are able to comment on what they say or ask them questions, but otherwise, if we want to have a discussion of that matter, it needs to be put on the agenda for a following meeting. The first item on the agenda is the election of a chair and vice chair. We lost our... Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, let's do introductions. Sorry about that. Let's start over here.
Morning, my name is Joseph Holt. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for San Joaquin Valley College, and this is my first meeting on the board.
My name is Gabrielle Jimenez. I was a student at Gurnick Medical Academy. I am a hospice nurse in San Mateo.
Good morning. My name is Diana Amaya. I'm a public member, and I work for a nonprofit.
And my name, again, is Margaret Ryder, and I am the Consumer Advocate member.
I'm Joanne Wenzel. I'm the Chief of the Bureau for Private Postsecondary Education. These two won't introduce themselves. They're with me.
Joanne's posse.
My name is Catherine Lee Carey. I am an attorney, higher education attorney with Cooley, and I'm an institutional member. And I think between Margaret and I are the 2 oldest members on the committee now.
My name is David Weiss. I'm the president of Asher College here in Sacramento.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to all of our new members. So for next agenda is to elect a chair and vice chair. I would ask if there are any nominations for chair from the members.
I would nominate Kate as the chair.
Any other nominations?
I would like to nominate you.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right. Seeing none other than that, I would call for the vote. Is that okay if I go ahead and do that? Or
Yeah.
if I have Richard there? Okay. Before the, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this particular topic? Seeing none, then we'll proceed to the vote. We have 2 nominees, Kate LeCarey and Margaret Ryder, myself. If I might see a show of hands, all for Kate Lee Carey. There are 4 votes, and all for Margaret Ryder. And there's 1 vote. So the new chair is Catherine Lee Carey. And at this point,
You get to reload.
I'm done.
Yes. Because I need to be able to pick you on the table.
Maybe my days of despotic rule are over already. Thanks, David. It was good seeing you.
If you will allow us just a minute to get a little bit reorganized here. Right, and then the next order of business is vice chair.
Oh, okay.
And look, we have a script for you.
Goody.
Just trying to make life a little bit easier.
Well, yes, full of surprises today. Okay. So, okay. Okay, so as you're a new chair, I would like to call for nominations for a vice chair panel.
I would nominate Margaret.
Anyone else? Okay. Do we need to do public comment? Anybody? Okay. I'm supposed to read this. I nominate, right? Any further? Anyone? Nominations for the chair are now closed. Public comment, repeat names. All in favor of John Denver chair? All in favor of Margaret Ryder for vice chair? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that carries the motion. To read my script. Margaret Ryder remains as advisory committee vice chair. Okay. Okay. So I feel like I'm in a play that I just got the script for. So I apologize that not only was I late, but I'm completely. Take a breath.
Okay, if this helps.
Okay. So announcement.
That's the minutes.
Announcement of future meeting dates. Is
That's
what's
me.
Next. Okay.
We have meeting dates set for the rest of the year, and those meeting dates are May 17th, August 15th, and November 15th. All of those dates, the meetings will be held over in what we refer to as HQ1, which is where we usually have our meetings in the hearing room. And I will let you know that we do have a couple of vacancies on the advisory committee. Going forward, we do have a vacancy for a student or former student of a private post-secondary educational institution. We have a vacancy for a consumer advocate. If anyone here or in our viewing audience is interested in either of those positions, we do have applications on our website, and I do encourage you to get involved if you're interested in doing that. That was just a little plug there.
So just to confirm the dates, May 17th, August 15th, November 15th.
That is correct, and those dates are already posted on our website.
Are there any members who have comments regarding the dates? Hearing none. Does any member of the public have a comment on the dates? Okay. Closing that item and moving on to public comment on items that are not on the agenda. And as Margaret noted earlier, you're allowed to bring up items, but we can't get into discussion on them until a future meeting date. So if anyone has anything they'd like to share. All right. Close that public comment period and move to the next item, which is review and approval of the May 17th, which was a long time ago, advisory committee meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments regarding the minutes they would like to discuss? Anybody? Margaret, you look poised and ready.
I was just gonna move.
Oh, okay. No comments? I did find two word errors. Okay, because that's the things I look for. But they're on my computer, so one was the word underlining instead of underlying, and the word Q, like a line, was misspelled Q-U-E, and it should be Q-U-E. That was it.
So other than those two typographical errors, I had no other.
With the minutes. Anybody else? Okay. Great. Ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Joseph? Any discussion? Any public comment? Okay, I guess we can move to a vote. Can you conduct a vote for us on the advisory committee meeting minutes?
All those in favor?
I have to do roll call.
Roll call? All right, so yea or nay? All right, Margaret Ryder,
Yes.
David Weiss,
Yay.
Diana Amaya,
Yes.
Joseph Holt,
Yes.
Gabriela Jimenez,
Yes.
Catherine Lee Carey.
Yes. Anything else on that? Jeff Mason. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item. We'll introduce Chief Deputy Director Jeffrey Mason to come up and speak to the committee.
Good morning, guys. Quick introduction. I don't think I've had a chance to meet this group yet. I'm Jeffrey Mason, Chief Deputy Director of the department. I've had the honor of having this position since July of last year. Previous to that, I managed a couple of the other bureaus here at DCA, the Bureau of Real Estate as the Chief Deputy Commissioner there, and then as the Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Security Investigative Services. Been with DCA for almost 8 years now, so excited now to have this new opportunity here at the Executive Office. Most importantly, I wanted to thank you guys for being here. Your commitment, your public service is really necessary to what we do and where we go, and we really appreciate you taking the sacrifice and the time to be here, so thank you. A couple of items of housekeeping. As the committee is aware, the Bureau recently went through the sunset review process, and that process resulted in a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 1192, and that bill is going to carry components of keeping the Bureau moving toward the statutory mandate. One big item in that bill is the establishment of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief. The DCA executive team is partnering with the Bureau, with Chief Winslow and her team on implementation of that bill. And we look forward to the positive steps that will result from once that bill's implemented and put into law for the Bureau. I'm told, because once again I'm new here, the Bureau's IT system, the current one, has been a big topic of when we're going to be moving forward, what that's going to look like, how we're going to get there. Where we are right now in that process is the Bureau's currently going through the very important process of mapping out all of its processes, all of its procedures. That then results in business requirements, which then the computer people put into code for us. The state has a very specific system. Once the process mapping is completed, the procedure mapping is completed, that will then be utilized to figure out what that IT solution is most appropriate for the Bureau will be determined. As folks know, many of the bureaus at DCA are on Breeze, but the process will determine what the system is, and we'll keep you guys in tune on that as we move forward. ACICS, I feel a little underqualified compared to most of you folks in talking on this topic, but it's been a big point of discussion here at the Bureau at the department for a few months now. The biggest thing is as we in this period here of waiting to see what happens with the Department of Education, the reauthorization, possible reauthorization of ACICS, the most important thing is that the Bureau and the department have actively reached out to impacted institutions, impacted students, relay to them all the possible scenarios and all the possible impacts to them individually, what they would be. We continue to monitor what happens at the federal level, and we continue to reach out to students and institutions and communicate. It's a storyline, as we all know, continues to be told outside of our grasp, but those areas that we have control of, which is our students and our institutions, we're going to continue to reach out actively and work with. ACICS plus, unfortunately, in the last calendar year, we had several institutions close, some medium, some small, some large. The biggest, of course, was ITT. While it's been traumatic to the institutions impacted and to the students impacted, this has been a really great example of what the Bureau can do when it's with its outreach, with its coming in, sitting down with students, and letting them know about their rights of recovery, their processes, where to go. It's a process that we have learned with and gotten better at each and every institution, and will continue to learn at. And it's a great example of Chief Winslow and her staff's devotion to their public service and what they do on behalf of students. So we really commend them. That's kind of my update. I don't know if folks have any questions, any comments?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
I always do. First question on the student assistance and relief position.
Yes.
Is that position now open?
We've posted it yet? No.
Not yet. We're still going through the approval process through the California Office of Human Resources.
Yes.
And we're close to having the chief position available. Also, keeping in mind that those positions are actually, we're requesting funding for those positions in the budget. They are in the governor's budget. They won't be approved until July. But we will move forward with hiring and getting those positions in place.
Yes.
So you anticipate you wouldn't try to fill them until after you actually have that in the budget? There's
No, we will proceed with filling them. We need to be on the ground, boots on the ground by July 1, functioning with that office. So we're doing the groundwork now, and we will fill those as we get the approvals through CalHR.
Okay.
Yeah, new positions require a very specific process, and CalHR is with that right now. We hope to have that approval back here very, very soon to get moving forward. So.
On the IT issue, this is an issue that I think I have raised every time
Yes.
that the director has spoken. The Bureau's predecessor suffered from a poor IT situation years before the Bureau was established. The Bureau, I've been coming to these meetings, I think, since 2010. And this process has been going on at least since 2010.
Yes.
And I think it is, I don't know what, but if there is anything that we can do, in 7 years we've had several different versions of the different smartphones for each company. We've had all different versions of computers. The world has changed a lot, and yet this agency can't seem to get a fully functioning IT program. They have made do. They've worked very hard to come up with a lot of sort of workarounds that are inadequate, but as best they can. And so I don't know, is there anything, I guess my question is, that we can do, that you can do, that the department can do to get this thing to a place where we really have some adequate IT for this agency?
One of the big learnings in the IT space this department's had in the last few years is when you have where you basically tell 10 or 12 different separate, DCA is an interesting place where we're really 38, 39 different boards and bureaus, different businesses basically, trying to put them all into one IT system. And so we've had a lot of lessons learned over the last few years. Now we are moving very methodically. What we've learned most especially is that the system works best when you know up front what it's supposed to do. And that is the process we're going through right now, is really determining the business processes. When you click here, you click there, what the system's supposed to do. That will give us the most reliable system when it's launched, versus if we launch without those steps, we've seen what happens, and it can really impact the operations for a period of time. We appreciate the patience, but we are actively going through the process. We're working with Caltech, the state's technology solution as well. But the department is very focused on getting the remaining boards and bureaus, into a new IT solution here.
I think what would be helpful if we could have from the department for our next meeting a timeline
Okay.
showing us exactly where we are in that process, what the remaining steps are, and what your projected date is for those to be met. I know the Bureau has been working through those processes and coming up with being able to note what information it needs, how it needs to get to it. But I don't think we have ever had a specific proposed timeline. I realize, having worked for the state in my past, I know that trying to get anything done in technology can be a real difficulty, but, enough is enough already. I mean, it has been so long. We really need to have some specifics, I think, going forward. And so I'd appreciate if that's
Great.
something that could be prepared for our next meeting.
Yes, I will see what we can
And I
prepare.
have a couple of questions on ACICS, and I don't know if that now's the appropriate time to ask them, or I think you're going to do a fuller report later on.
I am going to do additional information on ACICS.
I just make a comment, and I think that you can probably address this later, but in looking over the materials that provided information to students, I did not see that it actually was, it contained the kind of information that I think students are entitled to. The ACICS accreditation was pulled because of substantial failures in monitoring the schools.
Mhm.
And the information student said something about this doesn't reflect on your school, which may or may not be true. But there was no information telling students why it had been pulled, the accreditation had been pulled, which I think is something that they should know, that it was not properly monitoring schools that accredited, or at least according to the department, and that they had that information. And secondly, there was no information suggesting other alternatives, such as they might want to look into transfer, in addition to the ones that were suggested of, talking to the school, it's going to take a long time, basically you may be okay anyway. But I thought that those were two deficiencies, and I'm assuming that working with the Bureau, with Joanne, that I assume there will be another letter going out to the students in the near future that those things can be addressed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've taken notes. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Well, once again, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it, and have a good meeting today. Thank you. Of course.
Don't go too far.
Yeah, don't leave. Does anyone have public comment or anything to raise on Mr. Mason's comments? Okay, well, with that then, sorry ladies, move on to the next item, which is the Bureau Operations update. We have first enforcement report. Well, it says Yvette, but neither of you is Yvette.
No.
Did Yvette get trapped in Australia, never to return?
I believe she's back, just not
Okay.
available today. So.
Okay, so then, why don't you, ladies, introduce yourself, and I think the first item is the enforcement report.
Certainly. Good morning, committee members. I am Beth Scott. I am the enforcement chief over the compliance unit and the annual report unit. I'm new to this bureau. In my second month, 10th week. I come from the Board of Registered Nursing for about 6-7 years. I worked at speech pathology audiology, and prior to that, 22 years at Department of Corrections. I'm going to speak to you today on the compliance unit and give you some statistics and some direction that I'm going, and I welcome any recommendations from this committee. So in calendar year 2015, we completed 168 inspections. In calendar year 2016, we completed 166 inspections. So my focus will be working on a training process for new inspectors so we can have some uniform inspections and a very comprehensive, good training program for our inspectors moving forward. We will be looking at increasing the number of inspections as well as increasing the quality of our inspections. We are working with the Office of Information Services with Department of Consumer Affairs to work on our inspection prioritization report that will give us information on making sure that we are inspecting, giving attention to inspections to the facilities that have the most risk factors, so we can focus with those institutions. We are currently reviewing all of our processes, as you were made aware a little bit ago, working on all of our procedures, making sure they're in place, so when the time comes for our new system, we have all of our business practices mapped out, so that'll be effective. We are exploring our alternative methods for administering our student surveys, so we can reach more students and have more success in that area, to get more input. As I said, that's my report, but I welcome any questions or any suggestions that you may have for me being new to this bureau moving forward.
How are you surveying students now? Like what methodology?
Right now, when we do the inspections, we have a paper survey. And prior to that, we will try and reach them via email at any email address we have. We have some success on the surveys, but it's a limited number per school. So we would like to be able to reach, the maximum amount of students for that input. So looking at all sorts of alternatives, maybe, I'm thinking of a Survey Monkey or something that would be able to hit a broader range of the same information and gathering it.
And do you do that in conjunction with compliance inspection visits?
We do,
Okay.
yes.
Could you elaborate on your plans for training regarding the site visitors, specifically for the uniform application of standards?
Yeah, the inspections, well, what we're looking at is maybe an academy-type training to where when new inspectors start working in conjunction with the investigation unit, now that we will be having some collaboration with the reports, making sure that they go into a training program right when they're hired, so they have an understanding of our rules and regulations and what we monitor and the minimum operating standards and the things that are appropriate to look at when you're inspecting a school. Also looking at more automation of some of the processes that we have now. Working with our staff here to automate, to cut down on the time and some of the prep work that you have to do in order to do these inspections. So we really are needing some automation there. So we want to make sure that the inspectors have a clear understanding of what it is that we're looking at, as also they have an understanding of the rules of evidence and what needs to be gathered, once they reach an inspection. If they're in conjunction with a investigation, then they would know what needs to be gathered. And this way, if they have a clear understanding, they're better able to serve the schools and assist them in reaching compliance, which is what we want to do at all times. So if they have a clear understanding prior to going out and when they get there, then we would have we're better able to serve the school as well and bring into compliance where we don't have to issue a notice to comply or have any type of action. So that would be the best. So, looking at that, I'm a very comprehensive, structured training academy style.
Do you have an anticipated launch date for that?
Well, we're in the process of working on that now because we are hiring some new inspectors. So we want it to be as functioning as it can when they begin. And we've already, we're in the hiring process for them. So it's something that we are really focusing on now, working with DCA's Solid, the training program here. They have a lot of classes here that they offer that they've already structured, investigative report writing, that type, or for the inspectors. It's in conjunction with inspectors and investigators. So utilizing what's already developed through Solid, as well as the Bureau has already worked on this, and they have very comprehensive, good procedures now. We just have to compile it all into a training program. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's not exactly laying out how we plan to do it, but...
Directionally, yes. Yeah, I would be very interested to hear in the launch date when you're ready to do that. You mentioned that you're in the hiring process now.
We are in the hiring process, and we have all of...
You're talking about months then weeks or months, not?
Yeah, it will probably take 6 to 8 weeks prior to being able to actually have a person start. So we will have a training program for that person when they start. Whether it will be a complete training academy type style, I'm not sure of that, but it will be a comprehensive, structured training program that we are able to document and articulate and track to make sure they have an understanding.
Thank you.
A couple of questions. On the student surveys, those were discussed at one of our prior meetings, and we saw the example and had come up with a variety of suggestions.
Yes, ma'am.
Have those suggestions been made available to you as to what was discussed?
They have been made available to me. I've went back through prior meetings to make sure I'm addressing any concerns that panel members had. So we will be taking that into consideration when we update or utilize a new, yes.
Great.
Absolutely.
And as far as the number of inspections per year, how close are you to being on track to complete the required number within the 5-year period, as well as additional inspections where there are higher risk situations?
How close are we to being on track? Well, for the last 2 years, we've done about 168 inspections. We currently have 1,083 facilities. We have a limited number of inspectors, but we are doing some hiring and trying to streamline our processes. So, you know, I'm not exactly sure, you know, I would like to be able to hit 500 of them. Whether that's realistic or we can do that, that's what we're going to strive for, is to do one announced and one unannounced in a 5-year period. So, you know, we're not real close to that mark, but I have faith. We have a hard-working group of people that are on board with open to changes or improvements, and they are all, you know, excited to set some goals and meet them. So, you know, I do have the new date, so I will assume that in May you're going to have some more questions for me. So.
Well, I being so new, you know, obviously you're not going to have all the answers right now.
Yeah.
But one thing I would like to hear going forward is what is being done to try to get it so that we are meeting that statutory requirement.
Exactly.
And including, you know, your determination as to how many more personnel do we need if that is an issue.
Yes, ma'am. What I've done so far is we are utilizing, we have restructured a couple of the positions in the compliance unit. We are hiring some staff service analysts at positions as opposed to associate governmental program analysts. And we are going to have the staff service analyst focus on some less complex facilities. Therefore, we will be able to hit a broader range. We've set the criteria through HR, so they will be able to hit a higher number of these facilities and free up the associate governmental program analyst time to do the more complex. And I believe that should allow us to inspect more facilities. So that's one change we made. We have 2 of those on the hiring process. We're also looking at each and every process from start to finish to streamline and improve anything that we do. So the inspectors now, where the average inspection happens over a 68-day period, if you do the math, you know, we're not going to hit much more than 168 if we don't change something. So we're going to be looking at every section and some automation to make their inspections easier, utilizing our annual reports unit, which it was designed for to assist in some of the reaching out to the schools and helping them come into compliance prior to even going to an inspection. We are taking an extremely proactive approach in our workshops, having schools come out to our compliance and our school performance fact sheet workshop. So we're taking a more proactive approach to inviting them and tracking to see if that is assisting in some better, you know, results and some more understanding of those processes that can be confusing. So we're trying to take all of these improvements and see if we can, you know, we'll lessen our time at an inspection if things are more in order when we get there, because we've been able to work with the school prior to going out.
And then just the last comment I have, question is, initially when the Bureau started, and for quite some time, it was a process of getting up to speed, getting people hired, getting people trained. And so I don't think that fault found with the Bureau in its early days necessarily reflects that the Bureau wasn't doing everything it was supposed to be doing or trying to do it anyway. But at this point, we have seen a number of very large institutions that have failed, and the failures have been brought to the attention of the public, the students, and the schools, not by the Bureau, but by the FTC, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Attorneys General, the department itself. And what I would hope in the future is that before problems reach the magnitude where you have to have a lawsuit and in fact it is so dire that the school really winds up closing, that the Bureau would be able to be the first agency to find out where those problems are, particularly the kind of things we've seen that have been problematic are the failure to disclose or the inaccurate disclosure of student placement in jobs.
Yes, ma'am.
The failure to disclose or improper disclosure of the transferability of credits, and I believe also perhaps in completion, but primarily this one about misrepresentations or failure to disclose about job placement is sort of like one that shows up in many of these lawsuits. So I'm hoping that as you're looking at this process, that part of what you're doing is figuring out a way so that the Bureau is figuring out those problems first, early, before they mushroom into big problems.
Yes, ma'am, we are looking at all of those areas, trying to take a very proactive approach. And I appreciate your comments, and I did read your prior comments in the last committee meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Quick question here.
Yes, sir.
Of the 168, was it pretty much split between announced and unannounced?
Yes.
With the ACICS issue, did you move some of those schools to the front of the list or no?
Yes.
Have you seen any issues related to ACICS schools, or is it pretty much the same as other accredited institutions?
Not that I would track in the short time I've been there.
I didn't think you would.
Yes.
Just a couple thoughts for you, Beth, relating to the training.
Yes, ma'am.
So I love the idea of them going through this sort of investigative training because, that gives them the tools to be an investigator. But one thing to think about and maybe consider implementing or making part of the training is sort of on the ground at a school contextual part of the training. And so I think one of the things, and I'm sure that, Joseph and David have been through visits and know that one of the challenges for the schools is inconsistency with what maybe I think that we've, since last year, that they had combined, and correct me if I'm wrong, the sort of pre-visit desk audit and the
Yes.
visit, so that the same person is reviewing both sets of information, right? So that they're not, like, you do it and then Vaughn gets the second, like, here's the part I did, now go do a visit. Have they combined those things together?
For the most part, the desk inspection will be done by the inspector
The same
that
inspector.
will be going out.
Okay.
Give or take issues that come up or,
Yeah, I think that's a great
Yeah.
streamlining tool, and it's also
Yeah.
avoid having to relearn the entire school stuff with a new
exactly,
person,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So then I think the next piece of it, and what I see at least, is that there are often challenges with the inspector. Sort of, they know how to do an inspection, but they don't really understand how a school operates. So to the extent there's a way to provide additional guidance on sort of how schools work, so that when they're asking questions, they sort of know directionally, which department they maybe should be talking to, or if there's something on an enrollment agreement that is not, sort of on the list, but it isn't wrong to have it, but they just don't have that sort of big picture. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if there's a way maybe to ask schools to, sort of help participate in the training, like we did with the fact sheets, where you had somebody who's like, okay, here are the kinds of things that come up all the time, so that the investigators sort of know what to expect. I think that might be helpful in streamlining as well, because they won't get kind of hung up on things that maybe aren't as big a deal as they think they are at the time, because the big picture is that's that's not really wrong, that's just, you know, that kind of stuff. So just something to consider, and I'm sure that there are schools, you know, bureau-covered schools that would be happy to volunteer to, you know, participate in training and provide guidance on
Also,
that kind of
with
stuff.
with your training, have a field trip. I mean, I'll offer, you know, we've had the Bureau at our school before for training opportunities, and
Yeah, it's a great idea.
it's kind of good to go to a school. I think sometimes the feedback is, I know I'm going to a bad school. If I'm going to a private school, I know it's got to be bad, and they get there and they say, it's not bad. What happened? I can't be in the right place. And so, by all means, you know,
Thank you
we'll make
very much.
ourselves available.
I think that's a great idea, and would also suggest, to the extent that you're including schools in facilitating training, that it would probably be very helpful also to have some of the student advocates who represent students who've had problems with schools participate or work with you as well. And they can kind of help, I think, point out where things went wrong for them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Ms. Scott? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Fong Thatch, Bureau Enforcement Manager. I'm subbing for Yvette Johnson, our Enforcement Chief. I have for you this morning the stats report for the Complaints Investigation Unit. So on page 1 of the report is the monthly complaints received and closed for the 2016 calendar year. In total, the Bureau received 921 complaints, which is an average of 77 complaints per month. The Bureau closed 1,011 complaints. That's an average of 84 closures per month. Not only did the Bureau close 10% more complaints than received, the 1,011 complaint closed is a 25% increase from 2015. The next page is the next page of the report is a bar graph that compares the number of pending complaints as well as internal versus external complaints for 2015 and 16. As of December 31st, 2016, the Bureau had 964 pending complaints, 37% of which were internally generated. Despite a 12% increase in the complaints received, the Bureau's backlog was reduced by 8%. We had 1,045 pending complaints in 2015, and it was reduced to 964 complaints in 2016. So that's another achievement on the Complaints Investigation Unit.
Are there any trends that you're seeing with the types of complaints?
That'll be page 4.
Okay, you're getting there. Got
Yeah,
it.
I'm getting there, top 5 complaint allegations. So the next page, page 3, reports the case age of our pending complaints for 2015 versus 16. The Bureau reduced the average number of days to close its complaint by 5%. So in 2015, our average days were 503 days. In 2016, we cut it to 478 days. And then next we have the top 5 complaint allegations for 2016. 27% of the complaints that the Bureau received in 2016 were in the category of fraud other. These are complaints that allege institutions of falsifying records or selling hours.
What does selling hours mean?
It could be selling of proof of training or
Like you didn't actually do any work, but
yes,
for
you didn't.
$500 I'll say
Exactly,
you did? Okay,
exactly.
gotcha.
The top complaint allegation was fraud other. The runner-up is unapproved institutions at 18%, followed by quality of education at 9%. And the list is rounded out by failure to make timely and accurate refund at 6%. And then we have irregularities in the admissions process at 6%. That's failing to provide students the school performance fact sheet or not disclosing costs and fees to the students at the time of admissions.
Can one complaint go across multiple?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and usually most of our complaints has multiple allegations, not just one,
So
unfortunately.
of the 900, how many individuals complained? Do you have that idea? The 921 complaints, was that really 500 complaints? Some of them had two? Do you have an idea?
We do have multiple complaints against some schools, and some schools are just one complaints. But usually when a school has multiple complaints, we place it at a higher priority.
So I'm just trying to get an idea, how many individuals, how many students complained versus, the one student complained 10
Yeah,
times.
one student has 5 complaints. Are you counting that 5 times?
Yes.
Or is it one complaint?
It's one complaint.
Okay.
Unless it's one student with 5 different complaints against 5 different schools.
okay.
Yes.
So the 921, it's 921 students or 921 complaint categories?
It's actually broken down, David, into internally generated, which would be as a result of a major infraction that's found at a compliance inspection. Then that gets referred over, or previously would get referred over to our complaint side of our enforcement unit. So it's that's kind of broken down on page 38. I don't know, in the big package, where you can see that it's, there's a light part and a dark part, and I'm guessing the light part is internally generated?
The light part is, yeah, the light part is internally generated, and the darker part is the externally generated. We had 964 complaints altogether, and 359 were internal complaints, and 605 were external complaints,
So 605 individuals.
individual complaints.
So even if they complained about 2 things, it was an unapproved institution and they had a bad refund, it's still 605, that's not? two.
No,
All right, thank
it's
you.
one complaint.
Thank you.
Referencing page 4 of 5, in the very large other miscellaneous category, you mentioned one example of maybe a trending topic in that group. Are any of them substantive enough to call for their own category? That seems like an unusually high number of miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous?
The fraud other complaint.
Unfortunately, with CEL, there's about 23 different complaint allegations, and the only way that we would be able to track that stats is to try to fit the allegations into the 23 different types.
And the cell is your IT system, or?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the,
Which references the earlier comment.
yeah. So as noted.
You're limited to 23 attributes, like you can only have
Yes.
23 values.
Yes. So as noted on the report, we did submit a request over to OIS to add more specific and accurate allegations into the system so that we could present a more accurate or concise report.
Do you have any shadow systems that are outside of the IT system that are addressing that? Looking for trending
Spreadsheets,
topics?
yeah.
Spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets and stuff, yeah.
The truth of the matter is, there's so many different ways to put together what a complaint might have in it, that it would be an undetermined number if you had to go to, to break it down. So probably the best you could possibly do is say, if there are 5 or more that fit this unique situation, then call it that. But there are so many different flavors, as it were.
Mhm.
But if you're
Makes it
seeing
difficult.
trends in the other category, then
Right.
maybe that's,
Right, and that's why we requested, our enforcement has requested additional,
fraud other categories.
For other categories.
additional categories.
I have one other question or comment. Looking on page 3 of 5 in the aging of complaints, I'm just curious what sort of complaint couldn't be resolved in 2 years?
That could be complaints for fraud other. That would require the assistance of DFI to go undercover, or Those are usually the fraud-related complaints that takes longer to investigate.
So more than 2 years to have a finding of fact, that doesn't seem like a reasonable timeframe.
Well, the truth of the matter is that, keeping in mind that we didn't have staff to process these complaints
Right.
for a number of years, so some of these complaints have actually been there when we only had 2 investigators to
Gotcha.
try to process these complaints. So before we actually got staffed up, we had over 1,050 complaints pending. And they don't stop coming in, so it's a matter of trying to work both ends of it, is how enforcement is now doing this to try to break it down. Every time you close an older complaint, I mean, if we only work the ones that are just coming in the door, our timeframes would be very short.
Right.
You know, it would look great, but that's not the way to do business. So we're actually trying to work both ends of the spectrum and close out the older ones at the same time. And anything we have to send over to the Attorney General's office is going to take a little bit longer, or if we have to rely on sworn
Peace officer.
sworn peace officers to help us investigate complaints, it's going to take longer. So do you have anything else you want to add to that, Paul?
And then additionally, our case age, while we're reducing the case age, in the past, our case age is based on when we receive the complaint and when the report is approved. Now we're factoring in, we're writing our own citations too. So the time it takes to write the citations now is also included in the case age.
A couple of questions on that same chart that we were just talking about on page, on the ones that were sent out to us, page 3 to 5, it's the case age. A question as to, as I understand it, this includes complaints that you have referred over to Bureau of Investigation or the Attorney General's office or perhaps a district attorney or someone. These are all included in there. So that part of the time involved is not technically your time, it's some other agency's time. You're waiting for them to take action. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I guess my question then is, does it make sense, or are there reasons not to break it out other than problems with IT? And I can think of one reason you might not want to break it out is sometimes those investigations are private and confidential, and you wouldn't necessarily want anybody to know that it's been referred to law enforcement. But is that why they are all included, or is it an IT issue or something else?
This is really standard reporting format for the Department of Consumer Affairs overall. So that's kind of the way the department wants us to report them and not actually break them out that way. There is a sub-report
Right.
that is posted on the website, right? Quarterly?
Quarterly reports.
Yeah. That is out on the DCA website that does include that, you know, how many have been referred over and all of that. But I don't think the timing is necessarily included on that.
Do you look at complaints by institution type? For example, an accredited institution, unaccredited, unapproved. I mean, I think that would be very interesting to see.
We don't do that.
We don't do that. We do take it in consideration, but our prioritization is more on the type of allegation, how recent it is, which geographical location, et cetera.
I thought accreditation was supposed to be one of the criteria for prioritization.
For inspections.
For inspections, I see, not for necessarily complaint response. Gotcha.
We're focusing on student harm or potential student harm.
Right. Another question I had is on the first chart about complaints received. There seems to be a spike in like February to June of 16. Is that related to some of those big school closures or not? You don't know, you can't tell. Do you have any idea why there is sort of a spike during that time period?
That's a closure, they closed complaints, that's.
Yeah, the light.
No, I'm looking at the dark. The dark is also spiked during that period.
Yeah, April 16th.
Right, it sort of goes from February to about June and then it tapers off. If you don't have any idea, that's fine. I just was curious whether it related to those major closures or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
You were just saying that there is, and it might just be for next time for sort of context for us.
Okay.
the percentage of the complaints that are still open that are pending with an outside agency. And it sounds like that's information that is probably available elsewhere, but if you could provide that to us, because I think it does give context to the amount of time taking. So if you have cases that are taking 2 years, but 20% of the open cases are with the AG, then that makes more sense. So if you could just provide us a little bit more big picture context of the number that are in, you know, it doesn't have to be detailed, but just sort of outside agencies, that would help, I think.
Okay, I'll make note of that.
On the top 5 complaint allegations, I think you said that if they fail to provide a fact sheet, that would be included in the fraud, irregularities in the admission process. So I'm assuming that would also include if they provided a fact sheet, but they misrepresented, or the fact sheet were inaccurate, or did not correctly represent the number of placements. And then I just had one other question here. And I probably should know this, on the chart about the top 5 closure reasons, can you tell me the difference between the non-substantiated and the non-substantiated insufficient evidence?
Sure. So not substantiated, unsubstantiated is when the evidence that's obtained during the investigation does not support the alleged violation. And then insufficient evidence is that the evidence that we obtain from the complainant, from the institution, they were not enough to confirm a violation.
I don't understand the difference between those two.
So unsubstantiated is that we have all the evidence that we need from the institution, but it didn't support the violation.
So the evidence didn't indicate that the
Yeah,
violation was actually a
yes.
violation.
And
It was like an affirmative acquittal, if you will.
An
Yes,
acquittal
affirmative
versus
acquittal.
a mistrial.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then insufficient evidence would be either the institution or the complainant didn't respond or didn't provide enough for us to proceed, for us to confirm a violation.
I have a question related to that same topic. The total of the top 5 is just under 60%. So there are 40% of your resolutions that are in some other category?
Yes.
I mean, what other options are there that there would be so many outside of these top 5?
It could be for non-operation, the school closed after, it could be for referral, it could be referral over to the AG's office. There's a whole list
So
of.
you have 20 or more other options that total 40% of your resolutions?
Correct.
Less than 4%?
Yes.
And no one of them is more than 4%?
Correct.
Do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
There's a compliance unit historical activity chart in the materials. Is that, oh, okay. Oh, back to back. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions for Pam before we?
I guess we all want to protect the students, and I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing to be able to do that. And I think being able to look at the complaints by, I guess you know when one institution is hitting you with all kinds of complaints. I mean, that's a big red flag. But looking at it by institution type, because a type will give you an idea of where other issues might be, and then you've got to go and do your inspections in those type of schools. I even break it out by accreditor. Because if you've got a certain percentage of your complaints are coming from one accreditor, that's an indicator that you want to spend some time looking at other institutions that are accredited by that. I think some simple, I don't know, but you don't have to wait for an IT solution. Get a spreadsheet, start tallying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is your concern, are you asking for the inspection portion of it or the complaint portion of
I
it?
think the complaints, that's the canary, in the coal mine. You've got to, you start to identify some problems, whether it be by, and maybe I'd love to think it's all unaccredited institutions that just aren't used to dealing in an accredited environment. But you've got to be able to spot trends in some capacity.
And David, we do some of that when they emerge.
So if we see a lot of complaints at a particular institution, or we see a lot of complaints for a particular type of institution, then we can bring that forward and we can talk about it, and we have meetings every other week about, what are we seeing, and is there something going on with a particular institution or particular groups of institutions, or what are we seeing? Trust me, through ACICS, this whole process, we've looked at a lot of ACICS, what's going on with those schools. But the difficult part of that is they all have to comply with the same law. So to break it out, that's kind of a stereotyping that doesn't really work very efficiently for us.
I want to say stereotyping.
Well,
But
it is.
one of the concerns is that certain accrediting bodies aren't doing their job. And so we have a lot of approval by accreditation, so.
But
If
we also.
we've got somebody not doing their job, that would be a priority for some inspections.
But regardless of what the accreditor's requirements are, they still have to comply with our statute and regs. I mean, at the end of the day, we're still looking at, are they compliant with us? And so it's something we can take a look at, but it really hasn't emerged as a trend, and as a way to really be effective to track that information.
And one of the points on our risk factor for inspections is institutional or programmatic restriction by an accreditor. So that is utilized.
Assuming they're doing their job. The ones that are doing their job you're gonna know about it. The ones that aren't, you're not gonna know about it. That's the issue.
So I think what David is saying is if you were to say you got 100 complaints about 3 schools, and they're all similar sounding types of complaints, and all 3 of those schools have the same accreditor. And the idea is that the accreditor should be issue spotting those complaints before you do. So is that something that should trigger you to, when you do your next inspection of another institution with that accreditor, you would look at that? Because that's something that has been a trend. And I think that makes sense, but I think you also don't want to, like Joanne's saying, you don't want to pigeonhole and say, well, just because this school happened to be accredited by ACICS, even though in all other respects, based on what we see, they're complying with the Private Postsecondary Education Act, we've had no complaints, there's nothing to indicate that there's anything wrong there, that all of a sudden you would heighten them to top priority because you have no indication other than the fact that their accreditor has failed to indicate that they have failed to do something. But I do think there's something, if you see trends in complaints and inspection reports that indicate that a certain accreditor isn't keeping an eye on something that you think is important, then I think that's something worth looking at.
And I want to make sure that in no way do I think ACICS, you have issues at ACICS schools. I don't want to, there's no evidence of that.
Could I just mention one thing, and maybe this is a topic for a future meeting, is that some of the prioritization is statutory, and some was put in place by regulations, I think, last year or the year before.
We're actually going over this week.
Okay, and so I think that's something that, we can take another look at to see if there's different categories we should be
Well, the truth
considering.
of here's part of the problem is there's different standards. The accreditors are going to have different standards. So just because an institution is violating an accreditor standard doesn't mean they're violating our standard. And I guess that's part of the problem. Or they're violating ours doesn't necessarily mean they're violating the accreditors.
Most accreditors, you have to follow the state rules, or you are violating the accreditor standards.
I get that, but how does that come down to prioritization of complaints?
If you've got a bunch of complaints, all from 1 or 2 school types, and maybe I bet you most of them are from unaccredited institutions, but if the rest of them are all from, because there's how many different accreditors, if you've got more than your fair share, if you've got another 20% from, name another accreditor, it doesn't matter which one it is, and everybody else is spread out 5%, 5%, 5%, 20%, and that doesn't represent 20% of the schools. It's just where the complaints are coming from. I do believe students know first when there's a problem at an institution, and they will let you know.
Fair enough.
All right, I'm done.
You don't have to be done.
When's the next meeting?
No, trust me, we appreciate the feedback, and it'll give us something to take a look at, and we'll go back and we'll do that. You know, we'll take a look at that and pull that information together that we have. Keeping in mind that there's no mandate that an institution tell us they're accredited. So there's that.
But you know if they are, because they're approval type, right? Approval
Not
through
necessarily,
accreditation?
there's no mandate that accredited institutions have full approvals, or approval by means of accreditation. It's just the way it is, but we do know most of
You can put them in the
them.
other categories then.
Trust me, when we put them in the spreadsheet that we use to prioritize, we make a note whether they're accredited or not. So that's probably something we can pull. Be a fun fact for next meeting.
Sure.
One more thing, and this is, I noticed on the licensing, they haven't, on that chart, there's an average days to approve. And
Licensing.
I know. And what I'm wondering is, on the complaint handling, because of the comment I think Joanne made earlier about, some of the complaints that are coming in now are being handled much more quickly, and some are old complaints you're trying to catch up with, whether it's possible, and if it is, whether you would be interested in doing an average days to handle a complaint by date of when the complaint was received. So for example, we could see if the complaint was received in the first half of 2015, how long those are averaging to be handled. Or if it came in 2016, the first half or the second half, is there a different average time from complaint receipt to when it's completed? And I don't know if that's physically possible with your system, but that might give us a better sense of how things are going, because you are dealing with all of those old complaints as well. And that does kind of skew the aging of the complaints.
Okay.
So a median and not just an average.
Well, a sort of a separate for each year or each 6 months, something like that.
Okay.
I don't know if you can do it, but it might give it a more accurate reading of how things are improving.
So is there anything else?
I have a follow-up question for David. When you talked about by institution type, what exactly do you mean by that?
Accredited, unaccredited, still going through the approval process. You probably know which buckets make more sense. Because part of this, when you get into a funding issue, or how the Bureau gets funded, it's got to get paid for. If there's certain types that are taking more of your resource, you want to know about that so that you can allocate fees. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Going through the minutes from the last meeting, the fees was a big portion of what the conversation was. So if you've got certain institutions costing you more money to manage, you should at least understand that that's happening. Do you know what I mean?
Any other besides accredited and non-accredited? Any other types of institutions?
When you've got approved and the ones still trying to go through the process, I don't know how many of those there are.
What about exempt, those that you have on the complaint process contract, who are paying a fixed fee, and are you getting complaints on those schools, and is it taking you time to investigate those?
I would also add length of operation and number of sites, multi-site institutions versus single site.
Maybe. I mean, I get what you're saying. It's a school type.
Okay, I just wanted to get some kind of parameters for how we might be able to break some of these things out to take a look at it. Thank you.
So, any other questions or comments on the enforcement report? Robert, do you want to do a public comment now?
It goes to the complete processing, so whatever works for you guys.
So what I was going to do is have the Bureau do their reports, and then we could do public comment. You can that way you can comment on any of them. Is that okay? So we'll do public comment at the end of the Bureau report outs. So is there another part of the enforcement report? Or is,
No,
okay.
that's it for enforcement.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item for discussion is the strategic plan. Robert Bayless.
Robert is not here. He's doing his civic duty. He was impaneled on a jury. So I'm going to do my best to cover this. He's been the lead on this, so my apologies if I have incomplete information. If you have questions, we'll take them back and we'll revisit it at the May meeting. So just so you know, as I tell people all the time, I'm not necessarily the best person to do this. So as you may recall, many of you were contacted last January, February, and March to provide comments to our Solid Training Solutions group and answer specific questions. I think the folks that were on the advisory committee at the time were contacted specifically. I think we had some stakeholder comments that went out to provide feedback on areas that we should look at for the Bureau strategic plan. And from that, we met multiple meetings with staff and with management and with the chiefs, and out of that came our strategic plan, and it covers basically 8 areas. Because when you're doing a strategic plan, you just need to you need to bite as much as you can actually handle. So on page 51 of the materials, I guess, or page 7 of the strategic plan lists those 8 areas that are covered in our goal areas. So we've got licensing, complaints, discipline, compliance, quality of ed, regulations and legislation, outreach and consumer education, and then organizational effectiveness. And for each of those areas, then we went through and we did goals. So if you look on page 9, you can see the goals for our licensing unit. And what we did after this plan was adopted, we have gone back, and this is why Robert was going to present, because he's taken the lead on this, gone back to each one of our individual units within the Bureau and helped them come up with objectives and ways to meet the strategic plan. So that is the information that I really don't have with me today. But there are specific goals that each one of these units has come up with to try to meet these goals. So I'm not going to go through and read the whole strategic plan to you because you're capable of doing that on your own. But if you have any specific questions about this, and we do go back and we revisit this, see if I can speak English, on an ongoing basis to see how we're doing with meeting our goals and objectives. So with that.
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
The problem I have with this is that the points are so broad that it's very hard for me to tell specifically what's likely to happen or specifically what needs to be addressed. And so I guess my comment is that as you're working through this, to the extent that we can provide input on more specificity, or you can incorporate more specificity, I think that would be helpful. Just as an example, one of the comments I made earlier is what we're seeing when there are large institutional failures. One of the main things we're seeing is this failure to give accurate information about job placement of graduates. But that specific issue, I don't know exactly how that would be addressed in these goals and things because the goals are written in a very broad fashion. So just, I think, as you're working through it, the more specificity there can be, I think, the better in what exactly you want to see happen. For example, what I'd like to see happen is, we're not finding out, that, after the FTC has filed a lawsuit 3 years later that, school has done X thing or is alleged to have done X thing. I really would like to see the Bureau finding that out early on before there are major disruptions. And I don't know how to address that exactly, but that's the only thing is I look at this and I can't figure out exactly what will result from it.
Okay.
Committee, any other comments, questions about the strategic plan? Okay, then we'll move to the licensing report. Robert Bales, AKA.
Again, Robert's still on jury duty. So we will have Lisa Raffretti will present the licensing information.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Lisa Raffretti, the Deputy Bureau Chief and former licensing chief. So I'm going to fill in for Robert on the licensing aspect. So this statistical report shows the fiscal year of 16-17, so it's from July 1 through January of this year. I think it's page 63 in your huge pamphlet. It also says attachment 7C. Okay. This shows the applications that were received by application type for the fiscal year so far is 446. The applications that are currently being processed or under review on an analyst desk is 294. And applications that are pending assignment that have not gone through the full analytical review is 91. And you can see that most of those are going to be your new full approval applications and the full renewal applications. So those are the ones that are not approved by means of accreditation. And then the next column shows you the total pending of 385 applications. That includes all of them that are on the desk and all the ones that are pending to be reviewed. In this time frame, they have approved 339 applications. There have been 63 applications that have been either withdrawn or abandoned, and 77 applications that have been denied. So they've closed a total of 479 applications, and the average days is the average days that since it was assigned to the actual analyst and the full analytical review took place, the average of all the applications is 115 days. The oldest application that is pending is for the new full application, and when I say pending, I mean that one hasn't been assigned yet, and that is from February 22 of 2016, and the renewal is from March 14th of 2016. And on July 1 of 2016, the total pending applications was at 423, and as of January 1st, it was at 385 with a 9% decrease. And I just want to point that in the last fiscal year, they had an actual 40% decrease in their backlog. So they're definitely working and getting through all of the backlogged applications. We've seen a huge spike in new full approval applications as some of the accredited institutions are switching from approval by means of accreditation over to a full approval. And I'm open for any questions that I may be able to help answer on the application side.
On the average days to approve of 115, is that average days for any disposition or only approvals? Does that include denials, for example?
All dispositions, correct. Oh, I'm sorry. It's only for the approvals. The denials do take a lot longer.
Okay.
It is only for approval, yeah.
You say it's 115 days from the assigned date. How long does it typically take to get assigned?
Well, as you can see on the new full, oldest pending is pending back from 2/22 of 2016. So you're looking at a a year backlog on the full approval applications. However, they are working, like the enforcement side, they are working them from both ends.
That seems like a really long time for an application to be sitting. What's the issue?
Usually, the issue is that it's an incomplete application,
Okay.
and we're waiting for information from the school, and we can't abandon until the year is up. So we're giving them a year to get their application to be actually a completed application for the new full applications.
So when you're, with that date, that February 22nd date, that assumes that you got an application from a school on February 22nd of 2016, that you have gone back and forth with that school, and they still have not submitted a complete application that can be given to the next sort of person in the line, education unit or whomever. So basically, it's still stuck in the application's not complete phase?
Correct.
And how long does that phase usually take? If the application is at least close to complete?
I don't have that for you. We'll hold it for a year, and after the year, we'll abandon it if we don't receive anything from the school.
Okay.
But like I said, they are working them at both ends too, trying to go through the backlog.
Yeah, I'm concerned at how much, I mean, I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's awful.
Right.
But if the problem is, and it's skewing your reporting out to make it appear that that's sort of the standard, like why would you have somebody sitting in a queue for a year? It isn't that they have submitted an application and been actively working with you. Say they submitted an application and then you are unable to get further information from them and it just sits and sits
Correct.
and sits. Okay, well that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah. I don't have the actual numbers of the rest of the pending applications because I haven't been involved in the licensing side for a little bit now. But average before was about 6 months of the ones that were actually a complete application, was about a 6-month backlog is where we were. So this year is the ones that are the ones that normally haven't responded to make their application complete yet. But again, I don't have the specific numbers on those right now, but I will mark that on here as something that we want to see next time for you guys.
That would be helpful. Can you give us a sense of, for the 77 that were denied, the basis for the denial?
I don't have that information with me right now.
Are a lot of those just abandoned, or are they actively denied?
If you look at usually the renewals, the most common denial for a renewal application is the financial stability. The exemptions, there's 40 exemptions that were denied. So that really skewed the number up there on denials, is because there was 40 verification of exemptions that we did not verify.
Okay.
There's a difference between abandon and denied.
Okay.
So abandon, we don't have a complete application, or we have not received information from the institution. Denial, we have a complete application and we've been able to make a quality determination that they don't meet the minimum operating standards. Abandon, by law, we have to hold that for a year before we can abandon it. Once we have a complete application and we've deemed it non-compliant, then we can begin the denial process. And the reason why we don't have an end date is because they oftentimes are appealed, and that shoots them into a different track with the administrative law judge and down that road. I hope that helps clarify some of that.
I'd like to just quickly echo Kate's concern and interest in more granular information on delayed cases, specifically to be able to differentiate between administrative non-performance, whether it's on the bureau side or the school side. So no concern for a school that isn't, getting you the information that you need. High concern for a school that's responsive and is waiting because you don't have enough staff, for example, right? And so in the current presentation of data, I'm not able to distinguish. And so if we could, in the next meeting, hear more about that, or the next time this data is presented.
I will do.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions for the licensing former chief, acting in her role as Robert today? Okay, then I think the next item on the agenda is also yours, Lisa, which is the strip
and student outreach.
Yes. So the Student Tuition Recovery Fund, statistics I have is the fund claims that we have, and so far in this fiscal year, we've received 465 claims. We have paid out 132 claims, with a total amount of $502,577. We've deemed that there were 60 claims that were ineligible for a refund, and there were 43 claims that we were actually denied a refund. And the difference between ineligible and denied is that the ineligible is they weren't a California resident, or the school wasn't closed and they went to a school that maybe was exempt or wasn't one of our schools. A denied one would be an incomplete application where we've worked with the student trying to obtain further information and no response, or they have no proof of any type of economic loss or proof of attendance at the school after working with them and trying to determine if they have or not. Currently, active claims, we have 404 claims that are going through the review process. We have 215 claims that are pending additional information from the student. And we have 132 claims that have been sent over to the state controllers for payment. And so total in-process claims that our hands are on and that we're working is 751. And then of those on the side, you can see that the Corinthian schools, we've paid 13 claims, and that is 13 of the 132 that we've paid. 13 of those have been paid at a little over $14,000, and 6 of them have been deemed to be ineligible, and 4 have been deemed denied, and we received during this time period 12 claims. And that's a lot of information, so I'm open for questions on that.
How long does it typically take from when a student gets you their information to make a decision?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information available right now, but I will mark it down on here for you.
You want to guess?
If it's a complete claim, it should go very quickly. 60 to 90 days is an average. It does take time once it goes over to the controller's office. That's the process that takes, that could take up to 90 days on its own. So initial review, going through it and looking at the claims and getting all the information could take 90 days.
From when the student gives you everything, and you've already made a decision, yes, you have $1,000 coming back, in 90 days you'll get it, 60 to 90 days.
Correct.
All right.
I have a couple of questions. On the pending additional information from student, do you have any sense of whether that is information that ordinarily is asked for in the application, or whether that's additional information after they've already provided whatever was asked for in the application that the Bureau says, oh, we need this also?
It's going to be both. Mostly what we ask for in the application. A lot of times it could be pending the loan discharge when we know they're going through the loan discharge process, so pending the outcome of that. It could be that the student is claiming that they paid $500 to the school and they're only provided in the application itself receipts for, say, $300, and so we're looking for that other receipt for the other $200. So those are some of the examples of the things that we will be looking for.
The other question I have is on the Corinthian stats. That seems extremely low. Is that because you think they're getting their loans discharged, or why do you think that is such a low number?
Most of the claims that we've seen from the Corinthian schools is that their loans are being discharged. They are still coming in, and unfortunately, I don't have the stats for you from the last fiscal year for everything. And being new over this unit also is, so I don't have a lot of the historical information for you on it, but we do see a lot of them that are actually being discharged.
Go ahead. I have a couple questions. One is, do you know how old your oldest, I guess, claim for funds is?
I do not have that information, but I will definitely mark that for our next meeting.
And then my other question is, on the Corinthian stats, you said you received 12 claims, but you paid out 13. Can you remind me when the Corinthians closed? Is it because it was in a different fiscal year, or?
Right, yeah, this is just for this fiscal year as of July 1, or from July 1 to January. So this is only the 6 months of this fiscal year. So, yeah, they closed a couple years back.
Joe, this may be a Lisa and Joanne question, but do we foresee an uptick in Corinthian claims with this changes from 1192?
Most definitely from the Heald schools. It opens it up for Heald schools, and we're reaching out to the Heald students that we have information on, or the ones that have already filed a claim and were previously ineligible because Heald was not an approved school for the Bureau. They were exempt. So we've reached out to all of those that our claims were previously denied on or listed as ineligible, and we've reached out to them asking for more information so that we could open their claim back up and look at it again.
Not only that, Kate, not only that, Kate, is we're actually pulling together information from the rosters that we received from Everest, Wyotech, and Heald, and trying to, in anticipation of OSAR coming on, OSAR, Office of Student Assistance and Relief, coming online on July 1st, we're pulling together contact information for basically any student that we can find, knowing that we're going to do a massive outreach effort the middle of the year. So as soon as we get that data together, just know that we're not going to necessarily wait until OSAR is online to start that outreach. We will do it in anticipation as soon as we have that data pulled together. But we're having to glean information from a couple of different sources, and it's taking a little bit of time, energy, and effort. But we're working there. So
Where's the fund now in dollars?
We're at 27.5 million.
The cap is still at 25, right? Okay. Any other strict questions?
Just a final question, are you going to be tracking the ATT claims the same way you're doing the Corinthian ones? ITT, sorry.
The ITT claims?
Yeah.
We are tracking all of the schools that actually close and how many from each school in that process. So if that's statistical information that the committee would like to have, I can add an ITT column on here.
It's been my experience, most of these loans are getting discharged. I mean, they're not, I don't think you're gonna get a big influx of new Heald. Maybe, I mean, relative to what we've got, maybe you'll double, but it's still not huge.
Correct, yeah. We are seeing that most of the loans have been discharged. What we're seeing is very small cash payments where maybe they paid $250 or, $20 a month to the school. We're seeing those kind of cash payments as more of the striff for those bigger schools that the Title IV funds have been discharged.
As you report on institutions, I think it would be useful and instructive if you could do that also over longer timeframes rather than being bound by fiscal years. So as far as administration of the STRIP over the long term, it would be good to have a sense of total context. These were exceptional, catastrophic events, and what is the total impact on STRIP for planning for the 100 years storm?
Definitely.
Going forward.
Dam breaking.
You can't say there's a storm in Northern California.
Right.
That's insensitive.
We appreciate the rain in the valley, so.
Okay, so if there's no further strict questions, then Lisa, if you want to move on to the outreach.
Absolutely. So the outreach events that we have attended in this fiscal year so far, in Sacramento in July, we attended the Chicano Latino Expo. And in August in Los Angeles, another Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Expo. And then in October, we attended one in Pomona, which was at the Southern California College Fair. Montebello Latino College Expo, and in Stockton, the True Hope Youth Summit and College Career Fair. And in November in Los Angeles, we attended the Cash for College Expo. And with OSAR coming on board, we definitely expect this list to grow into much more outreach for the prospective students and current students.
What, if any, materials were you using at these events? We had looked at some of the materials last year, and I think Joanne had said she was putting a hold on using them because we had found some problems with them. So do you know what materials, if any, were provided?
I don't. Joanne, do you have anything on that?
It was really just the basic, we're the Bureau, this is our contact information, these are some of the areas that we cover. And there may be something on there about, go out to the Bureau's website and, and see what resources we have available on the website. There's a lot of pushing to social media.
And these outreach events don't include outreach that you've done when schools closed, is that correct, the ones that are listed here?
That's correct.
To that end, Margaret, I'll tell you that we have deployed personnel to every school closure of just basically every size, because every student matters. And if we cannot ascertain that the students are available to group together, if we don't have access to those to those students at the institution, we will email them. I know that for ITT, we did not have access to those locations because of the quickness of that closure. And we did end up going out to multiple locations over a long period of time, working with the community colleges and working with some of the consumer advocacy groups to do outreach for the ITT students. But in addition to all of that, we emailed all of them because ITT did, regardless of the lack of a 30-day notice, they did provide contact information for every one of those students. So we were able to actually email each one of those ITT students with information on student tuition recovery fund and student loan discharge information. So, or links basically back to the Department of Education for that. So, and that will move over to OSAR, obviously, with the creation of the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, and then the Bureau will simply back them if we have a large school closure, they need more people. But it will be up to the Office of Student Assistance and Relief to actually make those outreach calls to individual students and make sure that they've got what they need to make their choice.
Any further questions on?
Do you have any outreach plans, because I know veterans are a huge population, that go into for-profit colleges, so is there any outreach efforts currently being planned to outreach to veterans?
I don't have any information on that. Do you, Joanne? We do work really closely with the Veterans Administration in California, the Title 38 group of people. Anytime that there's a school closure, we do work with them, and they are involved. They were involved with the ITT outreaches that we did too. But I don't know if there's anything else working on that at this point.
There's not.
Okay.
Probably because of the elimination of that from the statute, that other outreach. The outreach is all going to move over to the Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
Okay, the last thing I have is regarding the transcripts. And this, again, is just showing this is as of January 1st. This is a total number, not just the fiscal year, so this is the total number of transcripts. Corinthian schools, we received 7,381.
Requests?
actually, we received 7,810 requests for transcripts. Of that, 429 we were not able to locate, and these are for just the Corinthian schools. And the reasons for not locating that 429 were that, one, they were either a non-degree school, a non-degree program that was prior to 2000, because under the old Bureau, under the old law, non-degree transcripts were only required to be kept for 5 years, and so they're just unavailable. And then the others were that the requests were for other campuses that were in other states, not the California locations. And then of the other schools, all other schools, we received 1,314 claims. And if we weren't able to find any of those transcripts, it was because the Bureau isn't the custodian of records for those.
Question. For the ones where the school campus wasn't located in California, how do you handle those when you notify them you don't have the transcript? Do you give them information about the state agency in the state where the school is located, or you just say, we don't have it, it's not located here, or what kind of information?
We provide them with whatever information that we have regarding where their transcripts could be. So yes, we refer them to either another state agency or the other holder of some of the Corinthian records. Or even the trust fund, the trustee of the records, will refer them to whoever is listed as, that we have information on, or where they can go to find further information.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Any other questions for Lisa? Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you.
All right, so we'll open the floor to public comment about any of the topics we just discussed with the Bureau staff. Mr. Johnson, I believe you have the floor. You do not have to identify yourself now that I've already done so.
Robert Johnson.
You're not a mystery to us.
Representing the California Association of Private Post-Secondary Schools. If you jump in the Wayback Machine and go back to the internal complaint discussion that you had earlier, just to clarify, because I want to be accurate when I talk to institutions, the Bureau self-generates its own complaints from its internal procedures. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay, and the sources of its complaint generation are the approval unit?
Could be anywhere. It could be compliance. If we have, remember that notices to comply are only minor violations. So if we go out and we find material violations, those are going to get referred over to our enforcement unit. It could be as a result of our unapproved activity unit doing what they do. And then they turn around and generate an internal complaint because of that. It could be that if we have a denial of a request for exemption, that our licensing unit will refer that over as unapproved activity. And generally what they'll do is they'll let the institution know that they need to apply for approval to operate based on the information that we received. And if after a period of time, 30, 45 days, we don't have an application, then we'll start that process going as far as you need to get your application in. So it can come from just about anywhere.
So what you're saying is essentially that a complaint can generate from virtually any place in the Bureau at any time concerning an institution.
Correct.
Okay, once those complaints are generated, what is the process for reconciling whether that's a legitimately charged complaint? Is there a review process?
Absolutely. That's why we referred over to our enforcement unit, because then we have an investigator actually take a look at it.
So the enforcement unit has the final say in whether or not, say, a complaint generated by the approval unit is valid or not?
That's correct.
So if an institution has received contradictory information in terms of complaint resolution from one unit of the Bureau versus the other, then the final decider on that would be the enforcement unit.
Complaint resolution from 2 units, we should only have complaints coming from 1 unit. Complaint investigations coming from 1 unit.
Well, it's been my experience that there are approval folk who basically file complaints against institutions based on their review of the institution's work. So we've had situations where school institutions have called the office saying, well, I've got this person saying the Bureau this is inappropriate, another person in the Bureau said this was fine.
Okay, so we have someone reviewing an application in the licensing unit, and someone in the licensing unit says, your catalog doesn't meet, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have someone in the compliance unit that says, no, your catalog's fine. Is that kind of what was
Yeah,
going on?
it comes in various guises. It's not black and white. I think the crux of the problem here is its interpretation of a practice that the school is doing either as an applicant or as an existing institution, and the staff reviewing that. And I think sometimes it's been the approval unit looking at the app and then calling up and making inquiry as to what the school was doing, or an enforcement person on a compliance inspection result, basically making a ruling that basically that was inappropriate. So there has been some inconsistencies in terms of, who do we talk to resolve this issue?
The best thing to do is to take it up the chain to the manager, so they can hopefully politely ask whoever's questioning the practice, who their manager is and who they could speak with. And then that analyst, whoever it might be, should be able to refer them up the chain to the manager. When it comes up to our attention, then we try to reconcile it and figure out who's not understanding how it goes. When you have as many analysts as we have, one of the ongoing challenges for the Bureau is always consistency in the application of the statute and reg. And that's what Beth spoke to earlier, is just trying to get that consistent within the compliance unit. That's why we try to use uniform check sheets. But there's always something that will come up. Oftentimes institutions will change their catalog too, or enrollment agreement, or whatever the case might be, and we need to make sure that we're all looking at the same document.
So I guess the question is, internally, is there a review process across units on the same institution in terms of complaints being generated? Do you have any kind of cross-check?
Well, what you're talking about is not really a complaint. What you're talking about, if something's coming out of the licensing unit, it's going to be a deficiency notice, and we don't really look at that as a complaint. It's simply part of the application process. So the complaints are actually going to be, I realize there's a conflict, but it's not really a complaint. It's two folks looking at it separately. So there's been no complaint generated against the institution.
Well, I think the institution sees that as a barrier to forward progress, whether it's a complaint or a deficiency notice is something that's holding up their approval or something like that. So I guess in terms of expediting the resolution, you're saying that the institution needs to basically approach the head of the enforcement unit to resolve that?
Well, I would say talk to the manager. Always start at the lowest level possible. So ask whoever it is, whether it's the licensing analyst, or whether it's the compliance analyst, or whether it's the complaint analyst, to who they could talk to, because there's a conflict. Oftentimes the analysts themselves, when they're aware of that, can start that process going to compare why are we looking at this differently. And oftentimes when that's brought to their attention, they will start that process to try to figure out what's, why we have a difference of opinion, just right off the top.
And just observationally, it appears that a lot of these complaints are generated off of additional information that was not on the application but is asked for by the analyst or the reviewing person to satisfy some need. Not clear to the institution often why they're being asked to provide that, but oftentimes the delay in the processing of the approval tends to basically kind of surface in that discussions of what additional information is needed. So while we all wish it would be black and white, I think the reality of that is a lot of the delay that you see, particularly if an institution has submitted additional information, thinks it's appropriate, and is waiting for an approval, and the gentleman over, Joseph over here, was talking about who knows who's on deck in terms of responding to requests for information, get the approval down the path to full approval. Oftentimes the school, I think, and from what I've seen, is that it's asked for additional information that wasn't in the particular approval package. They respond, the analyst basically decides it's not sufficient or complete enough, and it sits on the analyst's desk, and the school is expecting that they'll get a positive response, and then a month later or 2 months later, somebody says, what the heck happened? And, oh, you didn't respond to, appropriately to the request for additional information that I gave you. So one of the questions that came up, and this is kind of fast forward now to the approval process, is that is there a letter generated by the Bureau that says we have the information, but it's not complete, and you need to respond to get your application moving again?
Okay, you're talking about licensing applications.
Yes.
You're not talking
Now,
about
yeah,
converting.
I'm leaving that alone because
Okay.
at this point, it appears that we just move it up the best we can.
And that's the best way to
let's
do that.
It does seem a little unwieldy, though, just from an observational standpoint.
Well, oftentimes you've got three different parties with different opinions. You've got the licensing analyst, you've got whoever compliance or complaints over here, and then you've got the institution. So you've got three different opinions, and they all have to be reconciled. So there's that. As far as licensing applications, we basically possibly could send 3 letters to the institution. One, if the application is incomplete in the first place, a letter will go out basically letting the institution know that not all the pieces are there. And then once it's reviewed by the analyst, there may be a separate deficiency letter, or there may be telephone calls to request additional information if it's not there. But we will only send 1 deficiency letter. And depending on the type of the application, but generally most of them, will then go to the Quality of Education unit to look at the programs. And that Quality of Education person may send a 3rd deficiency letter. After that, if the application is not compliant, is not deemed compliant, then a denial will go out.
Well, and again, I might observe that the fly in the ointment is that in this process, you have different people submitting their own professional judgment on whatever training they've received or not training that they received, that the institution's materials are not appropriate for their particular opinion in terms of whether it works. The person below them that may have reviewed that thought it was fine, and all of a sudden somebody above them or another unit signs it's not fine. It's very hard for an institution to keep track of this kind of process without knowing what specifically did the approval unit check off, we're fine, now the educational unit has a problem? Is that what we should know here? Or how is that communicated to the institution that, you need to stop worrying about the approval unit, but you better start worrying about the educational quality unit because now you've got a problem there? Is there a notification that goes to the institution on this issue, or is it up to the institution to aggressively contact the Bureau and say, okay, is the approval unit signed off? We're good to go. Now we have to go to the education and find out if they're good to go.
I'm looking at Lisa because she has more, lacking Robert here. I don't believe there is a letter that goes out after the deficiency letter. Is that correct, Lisa?
That's correct. The deficiency letter from licensing will go out, and when the school responds to that deficiency letter, if there are still deficiencies with the application, the whole package is sent to the Quality of Education unit, and the Quality of Education unit will include those deficiencies in their deficiency letter when they're reviewing the educational programs. So the school is notified if their original package was incomplete with the additional stuff. At times, the Quality of Education unit may see other deficiencies that the licensing analyst didn't see as they relate to the actual educational program. Sometimes there may be something in their catalog or regarding their library that is specific to the actual educational program, and so they'll bring that up into their deficiency letter.
So after the initial deficiency letter, Robert, when the institution responds to that, if there is a carryover, it will come out through the quality of education unit. So it's not like it was resolved here and now it's coming up again.
Well, I think there's a couple points here. One is basically while everybody appreciates that everybody brings expertise to their own specific job and they try to apply that to the application at hand, what seems inappropriate to some degree is to continually convene a new court of inquiry based on each stage of the application process.
I don't believe that's what's happening there. It's simply a carryover. Basically, the analyst reviews the application, they have a list of deficiencies, they tell the institution responds, they review that, they say, well, they met these, but these are still there. Those deficiencies go over to the quality of education unit. They're looking at different things. The quality of education unit is really looking at the programs. But they will include whatever was left over to give the opportunity another bite of the apple to clear those deficiencies. And if they're not cleared as a result of that deficiency letter, then it goes to denial. Now, here's the problem. If we start going on and on and on, which we did early on, we would end up with 5, 7, 10 deficiency letters back and forth between the Bureau, and the application process would take years. And so as a result of complaints that application processing was taking too long, because an analyst can't deal with any other applications if they're dealing with the 10th deficiency letter for this application, we've shortened that process to a deficiency letter from the licensing analyst and a deficiency letter from the quality of education specialist, and then we move to denial.
Well, you know, when you have a 400-day range for approval, I think you have to look inside that number and think about whether or not it might be better if the educational quality unit and the approval unit got together before it responded to the institution as to deficiencies.
They do different things, Robert.
Well,
I'd rather get it as it comes. If I'm deficient over here, let me start working on that. Because if I have to wait, now I have to wait.
Well, you're assuming it's all the same matter. And basically what Joanne is saying, which I think is accurate, is that it's new matter. So you're in a position basically to start the process a little bit behind because you're not aware of those issues early. So for anybody that's worked on an application, I just think that, you know, there's a little better mousetrap here. And I think a lot of it's communication. I mean, if you're interested in reducing the 400 days down, I think at some point you have to take a look at internal communication within the Bureau and then basically put it officially on the school, either an email or a letter that says basically, here's what we need and we're holding this thing up until we get it from you.
So instead of getting the information twice, you would just like one letter with a response period to respond to all licensing application deficiencies and quality of education deficiencies?
I think what I hear from institutions is that essentially it's very frustrating to put together what they think is a quality application. They get through the approval process, they think they're home free, and boom, here comes another letter from the educational quality unit asking for almost sometimes on contradictory information or contradictory demands. We've seen that situation occur, but even those situations where it's above and beyond what anybody saw in the application. So maybe the application needs revision. I'm not sure.
We're working on that revision of the applications.
But you see how surprise occurs with that, and then institutions don't feel really great about that. It can be offsetting. And
in the new system, that'll come out one day, if there's something that says, you know, just status of your application or status pending, where, you know, these are all the things that have to happen, you can kind of just be able to track, you know, where the check mark is or you know, pending new info, just something that allows an institution to be able to go look and say, all right, I'm approved on the licensing, I'm not approved yet on the education. Or education is requesting more information, but it looks like I'm all set over here. Just something visual, because what really is terrible when you think you're good, and the Bureau says, no, we sent you a letter 2 months ago, and you don't know where that letter went to, or you don't know where it ended up at your institution. It went somewhere, and now somebody's, you know, usually the institutions will try to turn this stuff around within days. can remember driving down here, all right, here it is.
Yeah, I guess I'd point out, there's no incentive for a school to wait on delay. I mean, if you really, talk to any institution, say, yeah, our strategy is to basically put an application to the Bureau and then sit around and wait for 6 months before we respond to any question the Bureau has. You have that strategy, you're probably not going to be in business very long. I mean, you need to move it. So the reality of it is the incentive is on the school to respond. Knowing that they need to respond might be another issue, but the reality of it is that I do think that most institutions would prefer to get all the bad news as fast as possible, because some of the professional judgments, frankly, that come out of the Bureau are up for debate. Let's just put it that way. And I think the institution has a right to decide whether or not they choose to debate that, or
And
just
they
comply.
absolutely have that.
Absolutely. Or choose to comply.
Because the appeal process is
Right.
always there.
Right. So, yeah, nobody's saying that. But the question is you need that information quicker than if you waited 6 months and got another letter from the Educational Review Unit and you're trying to get your program approved.
Can I just make a comment in response to this comment? And that is, I'm just wondering whether it would be helpful in the deficiency letter that goes out if there were a block that explained this relates only to deficiencies with the application. You respond, but
It does say that.
but it will then go on to the education unit, so if you don't hear anything, it doesn't mean it's okay, or something like that.
I think the letter
Then maybe
actually
it's-
says exactly
Oh,
that.
okay, well, then the schools would understand.
It's just when you hear. It's just, again, it relates to the discussion earlier on the length of time for the approval process. Just thought we'd pass that along.
And we appreciate that, and we are always trying to do process improvement, and we'll take a look at that. I don't know I think, I really like David's idea, and hopefully someday we'll have a data system that can actually track that electronically, where an institution can actually go online and see what's still deficient and know where it is in the process. I really love that idea, and students would be able to do the same thing with their complaints. I think that would be awesome, and that's kind of my wish list. But
It's on mine, too.
until then, we'll take a look. We'll take a look and see if there's anything else we can do. Phone call, whatever. Your application's going over to the QEU, the Quality of Education Unit. There were still deficiencies in this area, that area, whatever area, and expect that you'll see that issue again in a deficiency letter from the Quality of Education Unit.
Because it takes the school has to compile resources to respond to that. They just can't reach on the computer and pull out an answer in 30 seconds. They need to get staff assigned, they need to have people looking at this, studying what they're doing inside their institution. How does that comply? Does that work? Is that with our accrediting standards? Those kinds of things. So there's multiple checks that come out of these kind of demands or clarifications or additional requests for information. So,
One of the things we're trying to get all of our staff to do more of is pick up the telephone,
Yeah.
just
that
across
would
the
be
board.
helpful. Yep.
And, but the problem is, if you're, in the case of applications, there has to come a time where enough is enough. Otherwise, it does take up so much time on the analyst's desk that they the old way used to be to basically walk them through until they got compliant. And with the advent of the licensing application workshops, if we have someone that's bringing in that, that's going to that workshop, we're hoping that will actually get them to the point where we can have a complete compliant application on the front end. And, to that end, we will be working on the applications. It's going to be one of the next reg packages. So hopefully we can continue to do some process improvement and get to that point.
Yeah, if I ever meet an institution that tells me their strategy is to delay answering the Bureau, I'll tell them it's not a really wise strategy.
Not the best way to
Good.
go.
Not a good way to go. And then finally, the last comment is on the issue of transcript retention. It has been a long-standing discussion with the Bureau and I think its predecessor agency as well as the legislature that California needs some place to store transcripts for schools that go out of business. Whether it's the Bureau or whether it's somebody else, I think it's a vast state. It's got an $80 billion budget. I mean, there should be somebody in the state that has the ability to reposit transcripts, because it is a key thing for students. If you want to transfer, if you want to start another degree or another program, you do need a transcript to provide to the institution that you want to attend. And particularly with the smaller schools, you just do not have a lot of shot at keeping transcripts around for very long. So, it's really a student service, and I know the state's resisted that at the Bureau based on resources, that they don't want to be the repository of transcripts, but it's a big state, and maybe somebody in the education department or something like that might be willing to do something with that. So again, just a parting thought.
Can I just, when you have that conversation with the legislature, because I know you will, would you let them know that it would also behoove students in the state of California, you have private high schools had a repository of diplomas as well? Because we get a lot of requests for high school diplomas, and we just don't.
Well,
there's no place to refer them.
In regards to conversations with the legislature, I will just give you the quote: "Man playing, God laughs."
I just have one question on that.
Sure.
Have you done, I assume that, there's going to be a cost involved. Have you done any analysis as to what your members would be willing to pay per whatever student or revenue or whatever to fund or help fund such a repository?
Oh, because my institutions have unlimited budgets, they'd be happy to respond.
It comes down to the student. The students pay for this. One way or another, the students always pay for this. So.
I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, no, we
actually,
we have not had discussions, especially given the fees that we're looking at these days. I doubt that's going to go very far in my membership. But the reality of it is that with electronic technology and the ability to put transcripts into electronic format, the overall cost, which I think 10 years ago we were looking at document storage and paper transcripts, and you were talking about a fairly substantial warehouse where you could have to do that. Now, that cost has changed. And rarely do you see paper transcripts. And I think that, comparatively speaking, it would not be that expensive to put together you would need somebody with authority.
Let me rephrase my question. I take it, though, you haven't had any calculation or analysis done of what that cost might be?
No, but it's getting, based on the growth of the sector, it's getting less every year. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. I will say that the Bureau does take transcripts wherever we can, especially if they're electronic. That makes it a lot easier for us. Right. But even if they're paper transcripts, we've actually gone out to collect some. Lisa and I drove out to a school to pick up transcripts to be able to protect those students going forward, and then we actually get them scanned internally and get them into a database. So more and more we are taking that on just as a.
And the one thing I would say, Margaret, so we actually, internally, we did look at that, but we're a 501c3, so the reality of it is that we're not government. And the statutory keeping of records such as this, the first roadblock we can't get past is we're not government. I think the legislative folks that we've talked to said it would have to be a government repository. Actually, San Joaquin Valley College offered its server farm a number of years ago to keep a number of electronic records if we wanted to do that. And, they've been in business for, 100 years or whatever it is. I mean, they've been around for a long time.
Only 40.
But the reality of it is that they're a private institution. So unless the legislature was going to designate us as the repository of records or another nonprofit, such as they do in, for example, the accountancy board, they have a nonprofit that actually runs the board and does all that stuff. So there's models out there for that, but it would have to get through the legislative branch first, and the governor, of course, would have to agree to that as well. So.
I have a quick comment regarding the licensing conversation before. In the absence of a progress bar, which would be obviously a great end state, maybe just a succinct flow chart of the application process. So when an institution submits an application, having a workflow so they understand what divisions are involved in that, and maybe also just a org chart. These are the divisions of the Bureau, and this is the flow chart for how your application will go through to approval.
think that would be helpful. And to Robert's point, there is often confusion for an institution who has submitted their initial application. They go back and forth with the analyst. They respond to the deficiencies. They think they're good. And then they get the next deficiency letter and it has a lot of the same stuff that they thought they'd already resolved come up again. So I think communication between the initial analyst and the school about, just like you were saying, telling the school, listen, you haven't resolved these 3 deficiencies, it's going to come up again, so make sure that you also include that one. I think that's helpful because I think it does come as a surprise a lot of times that those things are not solved. So any other public comments on the Bureau updates? Anyone? Okay, so we're going to take a break for lunch. It is 11:46, so we'll, no? Okay. So we'll take an hour lunch break and be back at, we'll say 1:45. Do I need to do anything else too?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Now have our full panel impaneled. Move on to our next order of business, which is agenda item number 8, which is the update on ACICS from Ms. Wenzel.
I feel like it shifted during the night or something. I don't know. Anyway. Okay. ACICS, the Accrediting Commission of Independent Colleges and Schools. God, I hope that got that right. I'm so used to calling it ACICS, I forget sometimes. I'm going to give you a brief rundown if you're not familiar with ACICS. It's an accrediting body, and we spoke briefly about it a little bit earlier today, but there may be those that are watching that are not familiar with what's going on with ACICS. So I'm just going to do kind of a brief rundown of what's going on, and then and what the Bureau's doing, and then I'll take any questions. So on June 23rd, the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Improvement, NASIQI, recommended to the Department of Education that ACICS cease to be recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. On July 1st, after that, the department also recommended that I got it. On July 1st, the Bureau contacted 64 institutions that were approved by means of accreditation with ACICS as their accreditor, alerting them of the situation and inviting them to attend a stakeholder meeting on July 14th, 2017. The Bureau also requested information on the number of students enrolled and a couple of other pieces of information as far as what their plans were if the worst should happen. On July 14th, the Bureau conducted an information session with stakeholders. I spoke to the status of approval to operate should the Department of Education pull recognition of ACICS, and the bottom line is those institutions continue to be approved until such time as the Bureau takes an action against them to remove their approval to operate, and possible actions against institutions. It's possible emergency action be taken if we believe there is immediate harm, or we could file an accusation against an institution to remove their approval to operate. We talked about ways to resolve the immediate issue. Obviously, this is out of the Bureau's hands. This is not our decision, but we talked about what institutions could do to kind of take themselves to higher ground. And the bottom line is those institutions can apply for what we refer to as a full approval, but if you look at the application, it's approval for institutions not accredited, but the statute does not limit that to only institutions that are not accredited. We have several institutions that are not accredited that have what we refer to as the full approval. The difference between approval by means of accreditation, just to kind of take a little detour here, for those that aren't familiar with this, and what we call full approval to operate is if an institution is approved by means of accreditation, it is an abbreviated approval process. There still needs to be compliance with all of the Bureau's operating standards, But the approval process is shortened in that we will take the accreditation and we will approve an institution by means of accreditation, and that institution can offer only those programs that are accredited, and their approval is coterminous with the term of accreditation. For institutions that have a full approval to operate, the Bureau goes through and confirms that there is compliance with every one of the minimum operating standards, and the term of approval, should those institutions be approved, is 5 years. So that's the difference between those two types. Now, generally what the Bureau does, because that's going to be the other half of the question, once an institution is approved by means of accreditation, if they haven't previously been approved, keep in mind that most institutions have to go through the full approval process before they can actually apply to be accredited. So most accreditors do require that institutions be approved in their home state before they, or in the state where they're operating, before they can be accredited there. So most of them have gone through that process at some point or another, and then they move into that. So if you have questions on that, write them down and we'll get to that in a few. So on July 26th, the Bureau sent letters to students explaining what was going on and encouraging them to speak with their institutions regarding what their plan was. And I know, Margaret, you brought up that you didn't feel the letter to the students was, I don't know, as strongly worded as it could be. Basically, we provided links to the students to look at what was going on by the Department of Education and what their issues were with ACICS. Unless we had an issue pending with that institution, we didn't feel like we could actually say, you know, your institution's bad or your institution's bad by virtue of their relationship with ACICS. So if we'll get to how we're prioritizing actions, but at that point, there was information provided to the students on where they could go to look at what those accusations were against ACICS by NASIKI and the Department of Education. So on August 18th, moving on here, so on August 18th, the Bureau and Department of Consumer Affairs invited 18 regulatory agencies to meet with the Bureau to explain what was going on and to respond to questions. One of the Bureau's concerns is if an institution loses their accreditation, will the graduates of particular programs in those institutions be able to sit for licensure? So we wanted to make sure that those students were not in harm's way because of licensure issues moving forward. On September 22nd, the Department of Education acted on the recommendation that ACICS not be re-recognized and basically de-recognized, if that's the word for it, ACICS. And on September 22nd, the same day that happened, the Bureau sent follow-up letters to the institutions requesting current information on what was going on, knowing that students come and students go. So we want to, basically, now that we had this knowledge, we wanted to find out, now that we're a little bit further down the road, what the plan was and has that plan changed? Has anything been done? And who are your students today? On October 3rd, letters were sent to students at ACICS accredited institutions advising them of the current situation and again encouraging them to speak to their institutions. On October 21st, ACICS appealed the decision and they remain recognized until the final action on the appeal. So they remain recognized, all of those institutions remained whole, basically. On December 12th, the Secretary upheld the decision of the senior department official and recognition of ACICS ceased. Institutions with Title IV have 18 months to find new accreditation. So what did the Bureau do at that point? Well, we didn't wait until that minute, but the Bureau has been going through the process with these 68 institutions, is that what I said in the beginning? We're now, or 64 institutions, we're now down to about 45 institutions because of the closure of ITT and a couple of other institutions that closed that had ACICS accreditation. So we're down to about 45 institutions at this point. And obviously we're not moving forward because of resources on all of these institutions. Many of these institutions, in fact the majority of them, the vast majority of them, have applied for full approval to operate, and they're going through that process. So they're being reevaluated based on all of the minimum operating standards. And what the Bureau is doing is we're looking at we're prioritizing what is going on with those institutions and the potential for student harm, and then any open investigations that the Bureau had on those institutions, and we're moving forward with further investigations and actions against those institutions where action is warranted. They have a full application on file. Basically, they also have a plan for accreditation if they offer degree programs. And so we're monitoring that situation from a financial perspective, because that would be where the immediate harm for students would be. However, the department kind of thought about that going through, and they actually put their own benchmarks in the provisional participation agreements. So there are basically check-in points at 90 days and 180 days that these institutions have to meet with the Department of Education. So we're in constant communication with the department as well as far as what's going on. So we're trying to take all of this into consideration. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, on December 19th, ACICS filed suit in DC court to stay the decision by the Department of Education. They did file for a temporary restraining order. That temporary restraining order was denied. They had a preliminary hearing that was scheduled, and I'm not sure what the reasons are, and it's not, there's not any further information on the websites, but that was postponed until next week. So on February 21st, ACICS will have their day in court, as it were, and it's, of course, a new administration now, and we don't know what's going to happen. So we continue to monitor that situation moving forward, and we continue to take actions on a priority basis against institutions that are, what do I want to say, deserving of actions. So that's where we are with ACIs, these for approximately 45 institutions now that remain ACICS accredited. We also know we continue to talk to, Richie's got this in his wheelhouse as well, so we continue to monitor those institutions, and Richie gets information from them on an ongoing basis about their progress towards accreditation by other accrediting bodies and such. So we actually have a couple that have already received other accreditation, so this number is probably closer to 43 or maybe even 40 at this point. So, questions from the committee?
Yes. First of all, in case what I said gave the wrong impression, which I suspect it did from what you said, I wasn't suggesting that the Bureau should say anything along the lines of this is a bad school or this is a problematic school or anything at all like that. What I was suggesting is that I thought the students needed a bit more factual information. I think that a one-sentence summary in the next communication saying the department in making this decision said it did so because X, because why the reasons it did so, I mean, they're pretty important reasons for students to know about. Not that you're saying that they're right or anything else, but you're saying this is a basis on which the department said it took this action. I think the students should be entitled to have that information without having to go look it up on a website. And secondly, I think that when you're giving them, here's options, that it's only fair to mention to them, of course, you can look into the possibility of transferring if you are concerned about how it will affect your, finishing your program. but also obviously giving them all the information about it's not gonna happen for at least 18 months and so on, which you already, I think, have in there. But I think
while it's in my head, I actually contacted the Department of Education because they had information in their blog that's for students that indicated that the students, basically in their words, didn't have to worry about for the next 18 months. And I actually contacted the department and told them that they might want to rethink that because any state, and not just California, but any institution is subject to oversight of the state approving agency, and should any state approving agency pull approval because of the current situation, those students don't have 18 months. So, I'm trying to also clean up the communication on that side as well. So.
Right, and I recognize that you may not, the communications there may not be perfect either by any means, but, and I see that I think you said you sent a letter to the students in October, but that wasn't in the packet. If you could just send us all a copy of that letter.
Is it online?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So, we do have an ACICS link on our website.
Okay.
And basically, I think, is the January letter on there? I don't think the January's letter is on there, because then once we also contacted the institutions again, and when we get all the information, we'll again be going out with another communication with the students. We were hoping to wait until we know what's going to happen in court, because we don't want to create issues when.
Just when you do, a couple more facts, I think would be useful for the students to have.
Take that.
And then I was just going to mention, I had just heard that at that hearing, where they didn't have the hearing on the preliminary injunction, the court did allow several attorneys general to intervene, at least with respect to if there's any settlement. But I don't think it's been decided as to whether they can intervene completely in the lawsuit until ACICS has a chance to file an opposition brief. But that's sort of the... Might have been, or I think the ACICS wanted it to respond to the intervention motion, although the judge didn't give the AGs yet the ability to intervene with respect to the preliminary injunction, so it's not entirely clear, but in any event, there are several AGs now that are somewhat in the lawsuit as well.
And I did reach out to ACICS because I have a pretty good relationship with all of the accreditors, and I basically was told that, sorry, we can't talk about it. So there was that.
We did in our materials have the January 11th follow-up letter to the ACICS accredited institutions. There is an explicit request for documents they needed to prepare for the department actually, with a deadline of January 25th. I'm curious, what have you received from the affected institutions? Because that date now has passed, so do you already have all of that information?
There was only a handful of institutions that didn't submit that information, maybe 2 or 3. All the other institutions did give us all the information we requested.
And part of that issue might be that not every ACICS accredited institution has Title IV. So when there is no documentation to be submitted to the department, they're not going to have it. So there is that. I know it's weird. People don't understand that not every institution is accredited, not every institution that is accredited actually participates in Title IV, and not every institution that's accredited is approved by means of accreditation. But trust me, we have every configuration that you could possibly come up with. It would take a mathematician to kind of come up with all of the possibilities, but we have them.
So is it fair to say at this point then that the Bureau doesn't have concerns with non-response from institutions?